Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Collecting Issues, where this week we'll be taking a look at Daredevil, Born Again, collecting issues 227 to 233 of the 1986 run on the character, written by Frank Miller and drawn by David Mazzucchelli for Marvel Comics.
So the comic book education continues?
We're talking inappropriate comic books.
You're into comic books, aren't you?
That's comic book shit.
Like in the comic books.
Oh, very exciting. Welcome back, everyone, to the first podcast of this year, even though it's March. Don't at us. Don't at us.
We did a January. Stop that.
Did we do January? What did we do in January?
Doom one shot in January.
We did do one shot. He's not lying, everybody. We just skipped February because we've led busy lives. Well, welcome back to Collecting Issues, the monthly comic book club. Benjamin.
Yes.
This is older than you.
This is so old, Michael. This came out in 1986.
All right. Calm down. Take it down a notch. It's not older than me.
Not older than thee, Michael, but only by a year or so.
No, I'm a bit older than that, Benjamin. But thank you. Thank you for commenting on my spryness.
Mick was born in 1883, ladies and gentlemen. A full 103 years before this was published.
Yeah. Have you ever heard of the vampire Lestat, Benjamin? He's based on me. They got it a bit wrong, let's be honest.
I would love an Irish equivalent to Lestat who was constantly hanging around Lestat the vampire being like, you're some tosser. You're some chancer.
Ostat, his name would be, obviously.
Ostat. But listen, we're not here to talk about Mick's phenomenal longevity, ladies and gentlemen. It's not what we're here.
No.
What we're here to do is talk about some comic books. And if you enjoy that kind of thing, ladies and gentlemen.
Do you?
And friends beyond the binary. Sorry, I've become very binary in my introduction this week, Michael. We'll move that there. Ladies and gentlemen,
leave it in.
friends beyond the binary. No. I'll just broaden out the horizon there. If you do enjoy a comic book, folks,
yes,
why don't you consider maybe hopping up on our Discord and letting us know your thoughts on this comic book, other comic books we've covered. We've covered Doom from Marvel Comics. We've covered bloody noir crime things in the likes of Friday. We've covered existential horror and apocalypse in the form of The Nice House by the Lake.
The covered fucking shitloads of stuff, Ben. There's like 40 episodes.
So you might enjoy this. And then we've got a back catalogue, folks. So why don't you, number one, go and give those all a listen. And number two, give us a review when you realise how much you like us. You really, really like us. Give us a review on Spotify. Give us a review on Apple Podcasts. Give us a review on YouTube. Why don't you follow the YouTube and see what's going on? It's all linked below in the description. And if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see our faces. I'm not pointing to my nether regions. I'm pointing to the description.
He is also pointing to his nether regions, but mere coincidence.
Mere coincidence. Michael, speaking of a man who spends an awful lot of time in the nether regions of reality in this particular bloody run, Daredevil Born Again. Gas stuff. Great time.
Gas stuff, Benjamin. Great stuff. One of the most miserable comics you've ever sent to me. So I read this many years ago, and it was miserable. And then I read it again in preparation for this, and holy God, is this miserable. This is just a man going through an awful time. We're not going to get really into the ins and outs of it until much later in the podcast, but by God, this is misery in comic book form.
Yeah, it's a tough read, and at times incredulously miserable.
Oh, it's hard going.
It's hard going. I tell you what, I'll never make friends with someone called Foggy Nelson. I'll tell you that.
No, we've both ended up with a bone to pick with Foggy Nelson. But again, we'll cover that later. Because, Ben, first of all, tell us what this even is. Go on, tell me. I know, obviously, because I can see the slide, and also I've read it. But you tell me, for the conceit, for the listeners, what's going on here.
So, Daredevil Born Again, Michael, is the dismantling of a hero, essentially. Daredevil and Frank Miller are perhaps, if you're more familiar with Frank Miller's more recent comic book runs or some of his earlier work with DC, he's quite often cited as the man who gave us The Dark Knight Returns. or Batman Year One. His DC work tends to be the tip of your tongue association. But
Was it, though? Sin City.
Sin City as well, absolutely a huge moment. But in terms of superheroics, perhaps, Michael,
Go on.
you might go with Batman Year One or The Dark Knight Returns. However,
Yes.
actually, his work with Daredevil, Matt Murdock, this lad, is probably where he cut his teeth and became the comic book auteur and lauded gentleman. Not anymore, mind you, but we'll get into that later, ladies and gentlemen.
Oh,
This is where he this is where he cut his teeth and became a pretty powerful force within comics. And his relationship with Daredevil and his run on the character would influence a host of comic book tropes and trends from the late 1980s onwards. We often talk on this podcast, Michael, about the heavy render era of comics. That's all stemming from Frank Miller's work on Daredevil.
Benjamin, here's a question for you. Is it? Or is this just the crest of the wave? I have a bit of a personal beef with the kind of great man version of history where Frank Miller came along and then everyone said, oh, this is great. Miserable comics about grim and gritty men with 5 o'clock shadows and pouches. That's it. That's the future of comics. Did Frank Miller create this, or was he just the biggest name riding the wave? I know you don't know. I don't even speculate. And if you could, Benjamin, speculate wrongly so the internet can get mad at us, because then we'll get more listeners.
They love that, don't they? And we love it
They
too,
do.
ladies and gentlemen, because our engagement and retention spikes. We love it. But
Go on, speculate wrongly then.
speculate wrongly. Well, look, I suppose one of the major things that Miller's relationship with Daredevil did was it broke the mold for the vigilante character within New York. Because Daredevil's early days, Michael, he was introduced initially by Stan Lee, Stan the Man, and Bill Everett, who was a big illustrator and artist at the time for Marvel. But that was all the way back in 1964, Michael.
Yeah. Benjamin, I've actually got a recording of that meeting. Would you like to hear it?
Go on.
Bill, it's me, Stan. I've got an idea for a character. It's Spider-Man, but rubbish.
Yeah, I mean, look, I can't argue with that, Michael. That's a fairly accurate depiction of how that went. This was in the early days of Stan Year's career when he just looked around his office.
Yeah.
And whatever he saw in the office or out his office window, he would turn into a superhero. And assumedly, on the day he came up with Daredevil, he saw a blind man walking down the street with a cane in front of him and said, oh, yeah, I'm going to do
reading
that.
his copy.
But how will I give him his powers? And then, of course, he went to the lottery ball system of Marvel, where the powers were, all the balls just had the word radioactive written on them.
Yeah, that was it. That was it.
That was
There's
it.
no need for a lottery.
And that was it. And I think, that's how we got Daredevil. Daredevil then became the man without fear, which, admittedly, great fucking tagline for a comic. That's all I'm going to say. Daredevil, the man without fear, is solid. It's some good stuff. Okay, I enjoy it. I think that was pretty good. But all he was initially, Michael, first of all, brutal costume. Yellow and
Very, very circus leotard.
very circus leotard, Michael. And interestingly, something that ironically, not officially, now is mocked quite often by fandoms as, well, he is a blind man who has no sense of colour. So maybe it's just a matter of, do you know what I mean? Maybe it's just a matter of a man who put a costume together without realising that it was bright yellow underneath. But of course that wasn't the case, Michael, because initially superheroes were bright, garish, colourful people, heavily inspired by the circus.
Yeah, and because it's easier to print them on the cheap printing of the olden days.
Yeah, absolutely. The yellow of the CMYK model is very, very present there, Michael, and works quite well. So that was in 1964, and you're spot on. It's Spider-Man with a different lick of paint, essentially. In the initial thing, he has his radar sense. A little bit later, thanks to Miller, that gets adjusted a few different times, and sometimes he keeps this kind of sonar radar ability. And other times it's just five senses working or four senses, pardon me, four senses working perfectly in conjunction and creating a map of the senses, if you will, in that.
I thought it was five though, Ben, because you're counting the sense of balance.
Oh, very good. Is that one of the five senses? Is that
Well, the 5 sense model, Ben, is largely like not real. That's
what do you mean?
You know, that's Michael. It's not real. It's not like it's primary school way of teaching senses. There aren't 5 senses.
Well, you've
In
ruined
reality.
this comic for me, Michael.
Yeah,
Ruined it.
like Benjamin, if you go out on a sunny day and you can feel the direction of the sun, which of your 5 senses is that?
That's my sense of taste, Michael, because I walk around with my tongue out.
You do. You stick your tongue out and go,
Yeah.
How's that fucking sun?
Give me that. Put that tongue on my tongue.
Put that sun on my tongue. That was actually the original tagline for Daredevil. Daredevil, put that sun on my tongue.
Yeah, it was also a Spice Girls song from the early 90s.
Fucking talk about Daredevil. Stop ad-libbing.
So anyway, in the initial years, that's all he is. He's just
Flipping
a
about the
blind
place.
fella with a charming smile, flipping about the place. Loads of flip, very acrobatic, in a different style, very much an aerialist rendition of acrobatics, not the Spider-Man bouncing ball kind of folded up version of acrobatics, but a very aerialist take on acrobatics. And he's running around Hell's Kitchen, does a lot of crosses, a lot of flips. His legs are always very tightly together, you know.
Yeah. A bit like Robin.
You know, yeah, a bit like Robin. He's pretty much Nightwing before Nightwing's about. Right? And so that was his Golden Age iteration. And his Silver Age rendition really didn't do him much better. Now, for people
Benjamin,
who don't... Yes.
Stop the lights here. I have to cut across it. There was no Golden Age Daredevil. Golden Age is the 30s. There was no
sorry,
Daredevil
sorry,
in the
Silver
30s.
Age. He's a Silver Age character from the 60s. Thank you, Michael. Apologies.
You're welcome. Because we'll get at it.
No, we absolutely will. We absolutely will, Michael. So, in that particular instance, Michael, he's just a standard, dull...
All right, lay off
run-of-the-mill
Daredevil a little bit. Lay off him a bit, Ben. Lay off him a bit.
No.
He was flipping about. He was boxing. He was doing flips and kicks. It was great.
Yeah. So his origin story at the time, Michael, was Battling Jack Murdock was his dad. Battling Jack Murdock was a heavyweight boxer who essentially a Rocky Balboa style character, I think, but from Ireland instead of Italy.
Yeah.
And in the initial days, he's a good guy who won't take the fix, right? And, you know, in a sport that allegedly quite often takes the fix.
No,
this was
we don't know
supposed to
anything.
we don't
Obviously.
know anything about boxing.
We've no insider information whatsoever.
But Battling Jack Murdock didn't take that. And, of course, that didn't go down well with the criminal sort. Because they said to Battling Jack Murdock, "You'll take the fix, Murdock. You'll take it and you'll like it." And he was like, "No, I'm a boxer. Fuck you." And there was a lot of that going on.
You made him
Early days.
Italian.
But then, Michael, unfortunately,
What happened?
sure, didn't his son save a blind man get hit in the eyes with a bit of radioactivity? And didn't he fucking lose his sight? And then all those hospital bills piled up, and he wanted to set Matt up for life in terms of a university career and stuff like that. So he took the fix.
Oh, very good.
And what do they do? He was in the
put a hit
ring,
on him.
Michael, and he saw his son, his blind son, who still came to watch his dad in the ring. Still did it. He watched his son, and his son said, "You can do it, Dad." And he was just about to throw the fight, and he said, "No, I got to do it for Matt." And he didn't throw the fight, and they killed him.
Yeah. Well, that's poor business.
It's poor business. This was pretty bad. Pretty bad.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and that inspired Matt on two fronts. First of all, it gave him the rage. The rage. And it also turned him into a lawyer who'd fight for justice. You know? And one of my favorite lines from this, Michael, because I used to read Frank Miller's run on Daredevil in Panini Comics over here in Ireland, which is for those outside the UK and Ireland, once upon a time, the only way you could get comics in a mainstream setting, an Eason or a bloody, I can't think of another newsagent,
Eason.
was the Panini Collector's Editions, which would throw together 3 different stories about a certain character, and this one was Daredevil and the Hulk. So you got one classic Daredevil storyline. It was Miller's run reprinted, and you got one modern Hulk story and one classic Hulk story from the Silver.
Very exciting.
Yeah,
Great comics, Ben. They were a great intro to comics. A lot of kids in the UK and Ireland intro to comics that way, including me. But for me, it was Spider-Man and X-Men. Being, as I am, 7 to 8 years older than you.
Yes, but not looking a day older than me, Michael.
Not looking, obviously, because look, Ben, immaculate. Look at the skin.
If anyone was to see us, Michael, they'd probably say, "Oh, is Ben your older brother?" And you'd be like,
Is
"No,
Ben your older,
he's
taller friend?" They might say.
He's just very haggard. It's the lifts, ladies and gentlemen. That's why I'm taller than Mick. That's why I'm taller than Mick. But anyway,
let's not delve into our personal lives so much, Ben. Let's talk about comic books. So Frank Miller takes over in 1979.
he does, yeah, with Daredevil 158. And with that, Michael, comes 2 interesting things. Number 1, he completely changes the tone of the character. He shifts the character in a completely new direction. And there's a quote here that I'll read to you, Michael. This is a quote from Frank Miller. "It was said that Daredevil grew up in Hell's Kitchen, an amazing name for a neighborhood. But that opened a Pandora's box of all the crime stuff I wanted to do. I borrowed liberally from Will Eisner's The Spirit and turned Daredevil into a crime comic." And he absolutely did. He completely shifted the character in a new direction.
Including
So
taking
the first thing.
one of Spider-Man's gangster villains and making him the iconic Daredevil villain.
Absolutely. So the Kingpin was a Spider-Man punching bag for most of the 60s and 70s. Like, this didn't happen until 1979, but Miller saw an opportunity to take a joke character, essentially, kind of a blowhard businessman that was made fun of for his size, and he turned him into an absolute menace, Michael.
Oh, he's one of the worst characters. He's awful in this.
The Kingpin's amazing as a character, and his influence, Miller's influence on Kingpin, I think particularly beyond all else, has been very enduring. It's huge. But you know, the other huge thing that Miller did here is that he fought tooth and nail to be the penciler and writer of his Daredevil run.
I like a comic that's singular vision.
Yeah, and this is such a singular vision, Michael. To be very, very clear, Born Again is the result of a partnership. That run would come later, after Miller had taken some time away from the Daredevil comic and got back in touch with David Mazzucchelli, and they drew a comic together. But Miller's style of comics was incredibly realistic by comparison to the standard Marvel method. The standard Marvel method was... Tell us what the Marvel method was, Michael.
Jack Kirby, Ben.
Jack Kirby, exactly.
It was just give Jack Kirby the vague description of a comic book that you'd like, then he'll go and do it, and then you just scribble some dialogue on top of that masterpiece that he'd come up with and take half the credit. Exactly. That's the Marvel method, Ben.
Yeah, that's it.
I think Jack Kirby died during this run, didn't he? Because one of the issues of this is dedicated to Jack Kirby.
Yeah, I think so. I think that happened. But it's a far cry from that, Michael. It's a very different style of art, and Frank Miller, as I said, fought tooth and nail to get that as a thing. It was given to him because he'd shown some success on other titles, and Daredevil's popularity was at an all-time low.
Isn't that so fun, Ben? How many of the all-time classic best runs in comic come from the same conversation of, guys, I've got an idea. It's a bit out there. Can I have a crack at something? And then someone says, well, we've got this comic that no one really cares about. Do you want to try that? Like, that's X-Men, that's Fantastic Four. some of the greatest runs in comics have come off the back of things that were losing popularity and someone saying, take your punt on this.
100%. There's so many examples of that. Miller's early career in the 70s and 80s is being the guy that takes the punt. You know what I mean? Being the guy, like Batman Year One is a complete tear down and rebuild of Batman as a dark and brooding super goth.
Yes, but here's the thing. Batman Year One is out of continuity in a sense. Batman Year One is it Elseworlds? I don't know if it's Elseworlds or not, but what Marvel would do is you'd have Daredevil where he was an acrobat, quippy, leaping around New York in the daytime, fighting Stiltman, and it just wouldn't be selling, and they go, all right, you can do your grim and gritty crime noir, religious heartbreak, junkie stuff. No one's going to care anyway. This is only selling 1,000 copies a month, which is like massive now, but
Huge,
rubbish in the 80s.
Huge by today's standards.
Yeah.
Like an insane number by today's standards.
What are you doing, Benjamin? Are you scratching your ankles?
No, I'm looking for a particular thing in the bag that's next to me, Michael. Pay no
Okay.
attention to the co-host behind the curtain. You just go on there.
What's going on?
You're spot
No,
on.
I've got...
The Marvel...
Yeah, go on.
What?
No, I'm just
The
excited
Marvel
to see what's in the
method
bag.
No, it's a bunch of quotes from a book, Michael, that I need for this podcast.
Oh, very good.
Which I should have taken out, ladies and gentlemen, and friends beyond the binary, before the fucking episode. But
You should have. But every
didn't.
podcast is someone's first podcast. Look, that's a known thing.
So much.
Are you going to read them out now, or are they to be sprinkled in?
No.
Is this the section of the podcast
in,
that's just
Michael.
quotes?
I don't just read quotes, Michael. You know,
Just read them out. Just read them all out,
No,
and we'll let the listeners figure out where they go. What are you doing?
No, I'm kidding. But what Miller does is he takes the character, and the common misconception at the time, Michael, is that he makes it grim and gritty. And while that is perfectly true of later work,
Yes.
it's not true of his initial Daredevil run. He absolutely took the likes of Batman and made them grim and gritty. Grim and gritty became a calling card for Frank Miller, and as you rightly pointed out earlier on, Sin City is kind of a go-to for a lot of people in that regard. Grim and gritty to the point of parody in a lot of cases.
Well, yeah, and you know, it nearly defines his later career post Sin City, where Sin City is where he jumped the shark, but what a spectacular shark jump.
Yeah, no, I mean, top class stuff. Top class shark jumping. But in this case, Michael, he doesn't do that. It's actually a very, very subtle shift. And all he does is he takes a superhero out of the superhero genre and puts him in a tried and tested genre from a completely different left field perspective and puts him in crime. Now, I don't mean crime as in Agatha Christie. I mean crime as in blaxploitation films of the 1970s and gumshoe hard-boiled detective fiction from the 1950s. That's all he does. And what comes out of that is because Miller at the time had such a keen understanding of genre, in particular crime, he was able to create something that felt much more realistic and grounded. Now, was it much more realistic and grounded, or was it much more familiar to an adult audience? And that's why this maybe elevated it out of, oh, Daredevil isn't a kid superhero anymore.
He's not just
Daredevil
flipping around.
He's not just flipping around anymore. And is that because adults are just far more familiar with the crime genre and feel that they can approach it in that way? The other thing that Frank Miller does that completely changes the game is Frank Miller has an incredibly cinematic understanding of art. And what I mean by that is he has almost a movie maker's vision for panel layout.
Which is ironic because he's a fucking rubbish movie maker.
Yeah, he's absolutely rubbish. But in this early stuff, his panel work on his initial Daredevil run, Michael, chef's kiss. Like, he had
Great
this
stuff.
wonderful sense of movement. He has a very, very strong sense of big moments on a panel in a restrained setting. And if you read that initial run, and I would strongly recommend that you go back and you read Miller's early work on Daredevil. Those panels stick in your brain. He used heavy noir shadows all over his characters, really close up face shots in taking up entire panels in dark shadow. Really, really beautiful panel by panel breakdowns of action.
There's some
great over rooftops, and
there's some great examples of that in this. There's a particularly great scene in this which is highly cinematic and very. I mean, it's almost like seeing a scene from The Departed in a comic book, and that's the scene when the reporting crew led by Ben Urich with Gloriana O'Brien and the two cops go to visit the nurse, who is also a stooge of the Kingpin, and there's a great series of panels and shots as it turns out who the betrayers and who the betrayees are, and there's a confined gunfight in a single room with 5 participants and only 2 guns, and I think only 3 shots are fired. But it's one of the best action scenes in comics I've ever seen, and the final splash page shot of the outcome of it, the cinematic storytelling of it and the sequential storytelling of it is so good that you're looking at it going, oh, holy shit. And it's entirely clear what happened in what order and who surprised who and what the repercussions of it are. It's great. It's really, really good.
It's fantastic. And the other thing I really enjoy about it is the violence is very visceral in Frank Miller's Daredevil, in a way that was not common, especially for Marvel prior to that. Well, Marvel or DC, I can't really distinguish between the two. But we would always see Daredevil get into a scrap, and there'd be a lot of whap and clang,
do a flip
like that. But the violence in Frank Miller's Daredevil is a living, breathing, beating, bleeding thing. That is as true for this comic, Born Again, as it was for his early run. Violence was omnipresent in Frank Miller's Daredevil. The New York that Daredevil existed in didn't feel like the New York that Spider-Man existed in. They were
rubbish, horrible New York.
Separate entities. And there are a few amazing panels within that run that really emphasize that. The most famous one being when Bullseye, the Daredevil's nemesis in many ways.
He's not in this, Ben.
He's not in this, which is interesting, and we'll get to that a little bit later. But Bullseye runs through Elektra. And I always remember that panel, reading it when I was a kid, going, Jesus fucking wept, what the hell? He turns her into a tent.
A shish kebab, yeah.
Yeah, and there's no pulling of those punches, and there's a lot of blood, and there's a lot of guts, and a lot of gore. But the other thing that happens is life is incredibly cheap in Frank Miller's Daredevil. People die all the time, and they don't come back. It's not, maybe. No,
maybe the super soldier serum will kick in.
No, they died. And all of that, Michael, and the reason we've covered this so extensively is because that goes on to shape what this comic is. This is how we get to Born Again.
All right, let's bloody talk about it then.
Yeah. So Born Again kicks off in 1986 under the two lads, Frank Miller and David Mazzucchelli. And again, I suppose it's a continuation of that more realistic take on a superhero, because previous to that, secret identities were sacrosanct, very important. Mm-hmm. And the reason for that was if you didn't keep your identity secret, Aunt May would be targeted by one of 6 sinister folk, and she'd be threatened for a bit, and it was all very awkward, and she might die, but she'd come back again 3 issues later, as strong as an ox, all over again, and be grand. But this does it in a very different way, Michael, because the level of betrayal from issue number 1, Apocalypse, in this is phenomenal. Let's feel. Yeah.
Just before we go any further, let's just point out that Daredevil Born Again 1986, six issue, 8 issue comic book run, whatever it is. Nothing to do with Daredevil Born Again, the 2025 television series.
Yeah, it's not that. All right,
It's not that. It's the classic Marvel Studios, Marvel Television adapting the name and going, oh, that's a cool name. Let's use that. And I mean, it's fun that it's called Born Again because it's on Disney Plus after being cancelled on Netflix 7 years ago. And that's all gas. But a lot of this storyline was actually already done in the Daredevil Netflix series, including, for example, having an imposter Daredevil.
Yes. Yeah. So
to
they took a
destroy
lot
his
of the
reputation.
Yeah.
So it's weird. So this isn't the 2025 series isn't an adaptation of this, and I've seen it. Ben hasn't. But if there are spoilers in this for that, it's completely a coincidence.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's just a coincidence, though. Don't worry about it. It's comic books. It's comic books. They're eating their own tails for the last 60 years. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. Look, ladies and gentlemen, if you've made it this far in the episode, do you know what you might?
Yes.
You might be guilty of?
Just leaving podcast running in the background while you're doing something more important.
Yeah, or liking us.
Oh, yeah, that one. Yeah,
So-
probably the first one, though. Let's be honest.
Why don't you do all the stuff I asked you to do at the beginning? Give us a review.
Like what,
folks.
Ben?
You could just hop up there and say, God, I really like the well-informed, sultry tones of Ben on the podcast, and it's a shame that other guy keeps interrupting him. Great stuff. Keep it up, Ben. If you want to leave that under the thing, and my mum, if you're listening, 'cause you might be, you can do that. That's fine.
You can do that. Just write down what he said there and then just type it out on the internet.
Maybe leave out the sultry if it's you, Ma, yeah? So, look, all I'm saying is, if you've made it this far in the podcast, you're probably enjoying it. Why don't you hop up on the Discord and give us your thoughts? Maybe you think I'm wrong. Maybe you think I'm a fool. Maybe you think there's nothing innovative in Frank Miller's run on Daredevil. But why don't you tell me? Get up there
Tell
on the
him.
Discord and let me know.
Sort him out.
Follow it and share it to all your pals. Go on, go do that. Off you go.
Yeah. Let's talk about the comic.
Yeah, let's talk about the comic. So, David Mazzucchelli steps in here, Michael.
Yeah.
And David Mazzucchelli has the one thing you might accuse Frank Miller's work on Daredevil of being is a little inconsistent.
Oh, go on.
And the reason I say that is sometimes very anatomically correct in Frank Miller's run, sometimes a little bit abstract, a little bit wavy,
Sin City.
a little bit more powerful emotion being conveyed rather than accuracy in that particular case. But David Mazzucchelli, Michael, is very solid.
I love the
Very
art on
solid.
this. I love the art. This for me is classic comic book art. This is, and that might be, reflective of my age, but, it's no bloody J. Scott Campbell or Scott Lobdell. There's no anime influence. There's no manga influence. This is 80s American superhero comics.
Yeah.
There's nothing that stands out about this.
Yeah.
David Mazzucchelli doesn't have a stand out. You couldn't show me a panel of some obscure comic and say, who's that? And I would be able to tell you David Mazzucchelli. But it's just bang on. It's bang on then.
It is. It's spot on. And he constantly delivers in that way. And we've spoken a little bit, Michael, in the past about our love of the likes of David Aja on the Hawkeye run, and that very minimalist but beautifully fluid and very expertly laid out panels and stuff like that. David Mazzucchelli is the blueprint for a lot of that. He is the man who pioneered this idea of simple, pared back, clear storytelling. And while I would normally never say this, it's only been improved by the reprints that have tidied it up and brightened the colours in different places. Because
How very fucking dare you?
If you pick up a collected issues of Daredevil Born Again, first of all, good fucking luck. Gold dust, Michael.
Fucking luck to you. We've got two, Benjamin, but I think we're like millionaires.
I think we've done very well. But yeah, if you pick that up, the colors are very bright, they're very vivid, they're very solid. Not what the original audience of Daredevil Born Again would have experienced. They would have had something a bit more muted.
Very cheap and muted.
Different.
But at the same time, Ben, still very 80s. It still looks like a very 80s comic. Like, I think nothing has changed in comics more over the last 40 years than colouring. And it's often the last thing that people discuss. But you could get a modern colourist to colour this with one of their fancy tablets, and it would look like a modern comic, and better than many of them.
Such distaste from Michael there for modern.
No, I don't hate
fancy tablets.
I'd buy a lot of comics every week and hate 90% of them. But like, it is very much an 80s comic. It does very much look like an 80s comic. If you were reading this in your bleeding paninis, it would be immediately obvious that this was the old story. And the only thing that makes that obvious is the colouring. It's not the art. It's not maybe a bit of the writing, like people saying G. Willikers, but...
Ollie, says Foggy Nelson. Foggy, why don't you shut the fuck up with your strange vocabulary and try being a better friend?
Yeah, try to be a better friend, Foggy. Fucking moving in there. The second Matt Murdock turned his back, he's a prick. Anyway,
we'll get into that in a second. Anyway, in this first issue, Michael, speaking of bad friends, Karen Page, a recurring character from years and years ago in the Daredevil, and one of the initial introductions by Frank Miller. She was their assistant, famously now very popular character in the adaptation.
Yeah, different character though. She was just a pretty receptionist in the comics, Ben.
Yeah, she was just a pretty receptionist in the comics. Unfortunately, she left to go off to be in the movies, and then Frank Miller depresses everybody right off the bat by making it seem that no one gets to be a movie star. You'll probably end up doing adult films.
You'll end up doing adult films in Mexico, taking hits of heroin to get you through the day. Ben, can we very briefly talk about women in this?
Yes, go on.
To my memory, and I only finished reading this the other day. To my memory, there are 3 women in this.
Yep.
One of them, a former pretty receptionist who was in a relationship with Matt and ditched him for Hollywood and ended up becoming a drug addict and adult film star.
Yeah.
The second, Matt's current girlfriend, who, when his life starts collapsing, ditches him almost instantly and runs off with his mate. And then the third, a nun, who's probably his mother. And they are the only 3 female characters. And not a great time to be a woman, comic books in the 80s.
So there's Lois as well.
Who the fuck is Lois?
Is the
Lois, the nurse. Yeah.
Lois,
I forgot about Lois. Oh, and there's Ben Urich's wife as well. Yeah. Sorry, there are 5 women.
They all exist to a certain extent to progress the plot for the men.
Well, so do the men, though. Let's be honest. Like this is. Yeah. So does Ben Urich. Ben Urich doesn't undergo a journey. Well, he does a little bit actually. I've undermined my own point.
He do well. Good, excellent. So there we go. But look,
Foggy Nelson though doesn't. He's just a prick.
Miller has an interesting relationship with women. Before we came on this podcast, you said someone must have left Frank Miller to start their career or chosen their career over a romance with Frank Miller. And if you look at Frank Miller today, you might say, who wouldn't? But
now you know someone made a terrible mistake. But yes, there's 2 women in this, and both of them leave the men they love to go off and advance their high-powered career and come a cropper for it.
Yeah. And boy, karmically, just not having a great time. I mean, look, there's Karen. Karen is every inch the fallen woman archetype in this thing. She ended up doing adult films, and this is very much pre the enlightened day, the enlightened modern day now, where we respect sex workers and their contribution to society, and we don't judge people or shame people for that kind of thing. But
you were saying
this
before
is the
we
80s.
started recording. Yeah.
Huh?
Is it the 8th? That's not what you were saying before.
Here. Get
You had your MAGA hat on then. Remember you had your MAGA hat on?
I can't wear that on the podcast, Michael, because then we would get any views.
Well, we
in all
will.
seriousness,
Not
though,
from an
that is
audience
a
we want.
trend. That is a trend where MAGA people co-opt the fashion of the time so they can get laid. That's not what we're doing here, ladies and gentlemen. Very anti-MAGA, aren't we, Mick?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Make
Good,
America
great.
worse again. That's my motto.
That's our motto. Always has been. So come here to me. The treatment of women here is pretty bad. There's Maggie. There's
Who the fuck is Maggie?
Karen.
Oh, the nun.
Karen is just life's punching bag for this. Karen
Although, to
played.
be fair, she comes out of it strongly. Surprisingly.
She does. She's given a bit of a salvation at the end. Look, I think the other thing we probably have to look at here, Michael, is that Frank Miller came back to this comic in 1986. He took a break from the Daredevil run from 1983 through to 1986. And what he did in the meantime there was The Dark Knight Returns and Ronin for DC. And they were huge. He came back to this title as a modern comic god, as it were. And he was allowed to pitch whatever he wanted. And he wanted to dismantle Matt Murdock's life. And he wanted to deepen some of the themes that he'd hinted at in his initial run. But one of the core pillars of the new Daredevil run that he would do is Catholicism.
Catholicism, wow.
And it's everywhere in this, Michael. From the visuals, from the art. I mean, there's some ridiculous Renaissance panels here. That's La Pieta. So
That's La Pieta,
panel
Ben.
in this. That's La Pieta, Michael, which is a Michael.
That's La Pieta there. Yeah. But it's not Jesus and Mary. It's
It's
Maggie
not
and,
Jesus
and Matt.
Mary. It's Maggie and Matt, which
Yeah.
I don't know. I'd be more inclined towards Catholicism if the main characters were called Maggie and Matt.
Yeah, Matt.
Like-
Just Matt. Praise
Just
Matt.
Praise Matt. But, those are in there. But also in this reaping what you sow kind of salvation through penance storyline telling. Karen goes through hell. Matt goes through hell. The Kingpin towards the end goes through hell. There's some very interesting Catholic-driven plot to this.
Ben Urich.
It's fascinating. Ben Urich goes through hell. He is tested by the Lord, essentially, in the form of the Kingpin. One of my favorite things about this, Michael, is the stained glass window cover that you see on all the collected editions. It's a stained glass window that features all the major plot points of Daredevil Born Again. And I'm going to pull it up here in front of you.
Pull it up
to
there.
show you. Because originally, Michael, I thought it was just a generic little, a bit of Catholic imagery there. But it isn't. It's actually depicting exactly what happens in the comic. But if you take a look, there's Maggie at the top. There's the Kingpin devouring souls at the bottom.
The Kingpin.
That's it
Oh,
there.
yeah, look at him.
There's Lois over here.
Oh, yeah.
There's Nuke here.
Oh, yeah.
There's
Don't get
old
me
Captain
started on him.
America.
There's
And
Captain America. What's he up to?
they have their parallels facing them directly opposite. So this is
yeah.
this is Officer Manolis or Manolis. I don't know. Manoli. It's probably Manoli.
It's Manoli, yeah.
Yeah. And then Nuke versus the Captain. Foggy and Glory versus I don't know who's up. Oh, Urich and his wife.
Yeah.
So I mean,
I'm sure she had a name.
That Catholicism is it Doris? Is she called Doris in the
Probably.
in the comic? I feel like she is. But that's everywhere in this. And it drives it. And it's possibly part of the reason that there's so much bloody misery here, Michael.
So fucking miserable. One of the most miserable comics I've ever read. Let's talk for 5 minutes about the deconstruction of Matt's life.
Dismantling of the man.
Funnily enough, it's gotten a bit tropey over the years. This concept of dismantling someone's life. Like we've seen it done basically in every TV show or novel series or movie where someone goes up against a powerful crime boss.
Yep.
including, as I said, Daredevil season 2 or 3. I don't remember which one it was, but kind of done to death these days. But I like how it's handled here.
Yeah.
It's on the cusp. I think it's closer to not being in depth enough, but I prefer that to being, here's 6 issues of how Matt's bank account's frozen and 6 issues of how his friends have abandoned him.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of a summary. It plays to the strengths of a comic book by not having 20 pages on Matt trying to find out why his bank accounts have been frozen and trying to unfreeze them. They deal with that on a page or two. And being a comic book, you just go, okay, all right, yeah, got it. He's got his accounts frozen. Let's move on with it. We know there's more happening here. We know Foggy's trying to help him sort it out, and we know he's fighting legal battles, and we know all this stuff is going on. But it doesn't focus on the procedure of it, which is fabulous. It focuses on the misery of it.
Yeah. And, it's constantly the impact. So, we get, I would call them the equivalent of montage pages, like a cinematic montage.
Yeah.
But this is an example here in front of you. I'm showing one of the ones where the Kingpin is sitting in his televisual throne room, essentially, talking with different pawns on the chessboard. And we get a series of black and white images of Foggy and Matt hitting the library, trying to figure out the case.
Yeah.
We get images of Kingpin's surveillance on Matt Murdock as he becomes more and more disheartened by what's going on. And then we get glimpses of Daredevil trying to fight his way out, physically beat his way out of the situation. And what I think is most interesting about this, Michael, is it's barely a Daredevil comic. It's very much, it's a Matt Murdock comic. And it's even the thing that Matt Murdock loves more than anything, which is running around kicking the shit out of people.
Yeah.
His outlet, it's taken from him. He loses his physical prowess as the comic carries on. And there's a fantastic moment in the Pariah comic. I think it's the 3rd or 4th issue, where he runs into Turk and Pike, who are 2 characters that were introduced by Miller. And Turk and Pike are fantastic because they were always Daredevil's punching bag. They were a running gag in Miller's run, where Turk was always trying to get ahead, and he would always have the misfortune of running into Daredevil, and Daredevil would take him out in 2 punches, usually, one or 2. But to show us how far Matt has fallen, how exhausted he truly is, Turk takes him out. But Turk doesn't realize he's killed. He gets stabbed
by Santa.
But Turk doesn't even realize it's Daredevil because he's Matt Murdock. That's the interesting thing here. It's a fascinating dismantling of the superhero identity.
That's funny that you've put it. It's funny that you've put it that way, because I actually didn't like that scene, because I was like, why does it have to be someone he knows? Why couldn't it have just been 2 random muggers? But yeah, I see that now. The whole notion of, it would be like the Turtles getting beaten by Bebop and Rocksteady accidentally.
Yeah, exactly. And it just shows that they are not, in the case of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, it would be that they're not at their A game. And it does the exact same thing here. Daredevil was essentially a god, because his physical prowess is usually beyond reproach. But he can't do it. He's not capable. He's been laid that low. So, I mean, the first issue is pretty standard, Michael. Karen Page sells him out for a hit of drugs.
Can't trust women, I think, is what Frank Miller is trying to tell us.
Yeah, we're not saying that.
No, we're not saying that. But Frank Miller
might have been saying that.
Might have been saying that, yeah.
And I think what's so interesting there is that the secret identity is not only a threat to the loved ones, but it's actually, in a modern sense, how you lose everything. It's almost the perils of identity theft, or not using a VPN on the internet, because someone will get into your bank accounts and destroy
this
them.
episode.
Do you know what I mean?
This episode sponsored by Surfshark. But Benjamin, it's kind of like
Surfshark, if you want to get on in there.
It's kind of funny in a way, isn't it? It's amazing that it's kind of beggars belief almost that Kingpin is able to achieve so much with a bit of name written on a piece of paper. Like, if he was really that determined to take Daredevil down, he probably could have figured that out. If all it took was a name written on a bit of paper. It's the 2025 equivalent of someone handing you someone's phone with their lock screen already unlocked. Like that's more. You'd get more from that than a bit of a name on a piece of paper. It's kind of amazing what this all comes from.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the speed at which his life is dismantled. Now, it's not as quick for Matt Murdock as it is for us as the reader.
No,
it's covered
6
in
months
about
past or something, isn't it?
something like that.
Quite a stretch.
Yeah. Essentially, the Kingpin finds out Daredevil's identity in June, I think is what we're given to think, because then Christmas comes along or the start of December, and all the dominoes that the Kingpin has put into place just get knocked. He is disbarred, investigated, his assets are frozen, and
Foggy steals his girlfriend.
Fall. Foggy steals his girlfriend. Bizarre. We'll get into Foggy in a second, because the most incredulous part of this is that Foggy Nelson will take at least 2 pages each issue to say, God, Matt's my best damn friend. And then he will say something bizarre like, how long has he been missing, Glory? And she'll be like, 11 days and 6 hours, Foggy. And he'll be like, God, we really should do something about that. But we do have Christmas.
Here's your knickers back.
but we do have some Christmas shopping to do.
Yeah, we do have some Christmas shopping to get you some new frilly knickers.
Like Foggy so much.
Fuckhead. He's a fuckhead. Now, if you look at it from Foggy's perspective, Matt has gone mad and disappeared. And it tries to play it off as that Foggy is like a shoulder to cry on for Glory.
Yeah.
But then if you read back on some of the previous comics, even before this run, Frank Miller was setting Foggy up to make a move the whole time. It's fucking atrocious. Foggy Nelson for the bin 2025. That's what I say.
Put him in it.
Put him in it. Ben, let's talk about the Kingpin.
Yeah, so the Kingpin is... I love the Kingpin in this, Michael. The Kingpin in this is my favourite character, and he has never been so menacing. I've just put a panel up in front of Mick here, ladies and gentlemen, and it's a side profile of the Kingpin smoking a cigar, and he has a little internal monologue going, and it is one of my favourite panels in the entire comic, because David Mazzucchelli has made a very clear choice in this, and he has coloured the Kingpin's eyes jet black with a tiny pinprick of light in them, and he has what are essentially the eyes of a shark as he watches his plan take effect. And it's a stunning panel. His monologue is fantastic. He says, as Daredevil, Murdock had cost him little, but hounded him, annoyed him as a fly would. Now with all the joy of a malicious child, the Kingpin tortures the fly. And
what a prick.
What a prick, but what a well-written prick. He's fantastic. And what I love about this is that in setting him up as the big bad, Miller is also showing us that Kingpin hasn't changed, because at this stage in the run, Kingpin has elevated himself beyond petty crime. He's not the Kingpin of crime. He is now the Kingpin of New York. And if you're familiar with the Daredevil Netflix series, the Kingpin that we meet in this comic is essentially the Wilson Fisk who managed to bring all the gangs together and run it as a business.
He did a bit Tony Soprano.
A bit like Tony Soprano, or the opening seasons of The Wire, where Avon Barksdale wants a Stringer Bell wants a conglomerate of criminals.
Stringer Bell is no Kingpin, Ben.
He's not, but he's a wannabe Kingpin, and that's important. But in this, Michael, my favourite thing about this is Kingpin can't fucking help himself.
He's such a prick.
He cannot help himself. And my favourite bit about it is, Michael, he does this dismantling of Matt Murdock from a bureaucratic level. Just tears him apart. But he can't resist the final bit, which is blowing up Matt Murdock's house. Yeah. And that is how Matt Murdock goes, it's
got you, prick.
And he says it in a single line. He says, it was a nice piece of work, Kingpin. You shouldn't have signed it. And I was like, yes.
Like delicious.
For all his airs and fucking graces, he can't stop being the violent little malcontent
Yeah.
that he is. He's phenomenal in this, Michael. I enjoyed him so much. I also love how New York is under his thumb. Ben Urich is a great example of that.
Ben Urich's whole plot is Ben Urich trying to grow the cojones to fight back against it.
Yeah. And
Benjamin.
he can't. Yeah.
No, he really struggles with it. Having said all of that, though, the best single panel of this whole run is Kingpin in his underpants, in his Speedos, doing judo with 6 men at the same time, beating them all up. There it is. It's the greatest panel in comics history. Look at him. He's like an egg on an egg. He's like his whole body's an egg in Speedos, and then his head is a separate egg.
So this is one of my favorite Millerisms for Daredevil, because again, it's a throwback by Miller to something that he established about the Kingpin's character in his original run, which is everybody makes fun of the Kingpin for being the fat man. That was the running joke for a very long time. But he's actually just a brick shithouse full of muscle and roid gut. And this is a thing that he used to do. He would have Wesley, his assistant, scour New York for assassins, for killers, for trained, really competent men, and he'd take them all on in the dojo, and he'd flatten them. And he does it all the time. He's an absolute chancer, because he's physically incredibly intimidating. And Daredevil gets his fucking clock cleaned at one point.
Yeah.
Kingpin.
It's funny, isn't it? One of the best depictions of the Kingpin in other media was Michael Clark Duncan in the 2003 movie, because he got the massive, intimidating physicality of him and the slow talking, that shark panel from earlier. He really nailed that whole thing as well. That was great casting.
Yeah, spot on work. Probably the best thing about that Daredevil movie.
It is definitely. Well, that and the scene where they kind of have a sexy misunderstanding in a fight in a park. Remember that? That was, I based my whole love life on that scene then. But look, that's neither here nor there. Let's talk about the advantages and shortcomings of telling a story like this in a shared universe.
Yeah, so that dismantling that we've just covered, Michael, is pretty much issues 227 to 231.
Miserable.
And Frank Miller drives home the Catholicism. The issues are called Apocalypse, Purgatory,
Pariah,
and Born Again. And really, those 4 issues are Daredevil's arc. And then all of a sudden, it becomes New York is very corrupt, but also America?
Yeah, don't forget America.
Don't forget America. And that's very much the vibe of this. So one of the things that happens is, in many ways, Michael, and I've had this thought in my head since I started reading it, this comic is a pendulum. It begins with the Kingpin setting actions in place. It swings to one end, decimates Matt Murdock, but then it swings back, and it's the Kingpin who starts to unravel. So it's a beautiful comic of balance. Yes, it's miserable. I can't refute that. I can't argue that. But it's beautifully balanced in that everybody goes through the same arc at the same time and comes out the other side in one form or another. It's really interesting in that way. But as the Kingpin begins to unfurl, he goes for the nuclear option quite literally. And he calls in Nuke. And Nuke, for anyone who was a fan of the Jessica Jones TV series on Netflix featured there, Nuke is the man with the American flag tattooed on his face that takes 3 different pills. He takes reds to make him go, whites to calm him down, and blues, I can't remember what blues do.
Keep
the
him
red
steady, I think.
Keep him steady might have been it, yeah. So red switches him on, white switches him off, and blue keeps him going.
But he is a bizarre character to introduce into this. Frank Miller's not. Is Frank Miller American?
Yes.
He is American?
Let me double check that. You've
double check
myself.
But the introduction of Nuke takes a weird socio-political sidestep and introduces the military-industrial complex and dehumanizing soldiers into the mix, which is all well and good, but Nuke is such a comic book one-note character. He's almost like a joke character. Like, he leaps out of a helicopter saying, "Our boys! Our boys! Gotta bring home our boys." Frank Miller is American. He is. Nuke is a weird character. It's bizarre that the Jessica Jones, season 2 of Jessica Jones, which introduced Nuke, I think, as a corrupt cop, had a more nuanced take on Nuke than this absolute lunacy. It's the most kind of random. This is like a 60s comic, nearly.
Towards the end, absolutely. There's a forced crossover event.
Forced crossover. Come on now. Well, I mean, first of all, it's not a crossover because we're not forced to read an issue of Iron Man or Captain America or anything like that. It does all take place in the Daredevil comic in its own run. It's self-contained. But there's a scene where Nuke is wreaking havoc in New York. And I guess the idea of it is that the Kingpin has kind of lost control of what's going on. He's making rash, poor decisions now.
Yes.
And, Nuke represents the nuclear option, basically, to bring in something. And I quite like that Daredevil really struggles to take him down. And the big three of the Avengers come and wrap it up. And I quite like that because it introduces them in almost a mythic way. Like, there's one panel of Thor. And there's one panel of Iron Man. And you get the idea that this exists in a shared world and you can't do shit like set a lunatic loose in New York because the Avengers might show up.
Yeah.
And I like that. I thought that was pretty good. But the next issue, or the final issue, is nearly a Captain America story, not a Daredevil story. And that is such a bizarre twist to take.
Yeah, absolutely. The military industrial. So Nuke survives barely. What I like about it is Daredevil is about to destroy Nuke. He's about to beat him to a pulp, I think. He finally gets one over on him, and Nuke essentially burns out, and he just keeps muttering the phrase, "Our boys, our boys, our boys."
Our boys.
So I can't
Bring
read.
our boys.
I can't. You see, I can't read that without thinking of Broden Kelly from fucking Auntie Donna.
Yeah.
all I can hear is Broden Kelly. Boys, our boys. And it's impossible. But anyway, Daredevil is just about to keep wailing on him, and Iron Man tells him to stand down. He says, "Stop. You need to stop."
Yeah, I've got
now.
repulsor rays and shit.
Yeah, ready to repulse you, motherfucker. And what I like about this is that Captain America is forced to bear witness to what the American military stands for now. So there's Contra elements to this. There's Black Ops in Vietnam elements to this. There's American interference in foreign territories elements to this. There's a wet works element to this. There's rogue general stuff to this. And Nuke represents all of that. He has a tattooed American flag on his face, and he is essentially the manifestation of America's bloody manifest destiny existence from a military aspect. Might makes right, and Nuke gets the job done. And Captain America is forced to look at this, and what we see at the end of the issue is a very broken Nuke. And Captain America almost takes pity on him, but Captain America then takes it upon himself to find out what the hell is going on and why Black Ops asset was let loose on domestic soil. Because that's not supposed to happen. And it's because the Kingpin is having a great old time with the general and getting him to do what he wants. But Captain America takes it upon himself to figure out what this is. Nuke has been taken back into the bowels of the military-industrial complex and actually escapes while Captain America is undergoing this investigation. What I enjoy about this, Michael, is, and I have the panel up here in front of us, there's a single panel in this that I think pretty much sets the tone for Ed Brubaker's run on Captain America.
Yeah, look, that's the thing. That's kind of my complaint about this. It's a great bit of character work for Captain America, but what's it doing in this fucking story?
Yeah. So it's a panel where the general attempts to plumose Captain America and say, "Look, Cap, we're both soldiers. We're both
Do it in
loyal to
Nihal
America."
Martin's voice, Ben.
Well, Captain. You and I were patriots. We're loyal to America, Captain. Loyal to America. And then Captain America looks him dead in the eye, grabs a piece of the flag in his hand, and says, "I'm loyal to nothing, General, except the dream." Except he's from New York, so it's I'm loyal to nothing, General, except the dream. And it's like that, and it's beautiful.
Chef's kiss.
Beautiful.
What's it doing in this comic, though?
The level of it makes me so sad sometimes to read Miller's Daredevil run, because some of the subtlety, nuance, and restraint that he brings to the writing in this, and David Mazzucchelli renders it beautifully every time.
Beautiful.
This is what I mean earlier. If you take a look at this panel, and if you're watching this on a reel, or if you're watching this on YouTube, you will see this panel. I'm going to put it in. This is what I mean by David Aja influencing the Hawkeye art style. It is this minimalist storytelling with block colors that just beautifully captures a moment. David Mazzucchelli is a master of it, and there's such a gorgeous restraint to this from Frank Miller that he just loses in later comics.
I think that panel's over-inked, Ben.
No, I love it. Get out of here. Get fucked. Get wrecked. Scrubby dub dub.
All right. Take it now.
Yeah. No. Anyway, look, there's a bizarre moment in there, and what happens is Nuke escapes, and then Kingpin, because Nuke is pretty much evidence of Kingpin's interference. Nuke was manipulated by the Kingpin into thinking he was a patriot, and we might edit this out, ladies and gentlemen, but I felt
Go on.
the Kingpin was almost he's a false patriot, right? He employs American hypernationalism to lull Nuke into doing this job for him. He makes him believe that Daredevil is un-American.
He's kind of telling Nuke to make America great again, in a way.
Yeah, yes, exactly. He does say, we need to scrub this land and kind of make America great again, in a sense. And I read this with an awful lot of prescience in mind, Michael. I was like, oh, this parallels one too many things that have happened in the last 10 years. Oh, the heebie-jeebies, there they are.
Someone's getting a big punch.
And Nuke, unfortunately, goes rogue and realizes that he's been manipulated by, frankly, an un-American non-patriot, and goes on the rampage. And the Kingpin is forced to get involved and stop him from doing that. So assassins are sent.
And then the assassins are the assassins sent, and then they tried to kill Karen, and her pimp gets killed. We haven't even taled about him. We're an hour and 10 minutes in. We haven't talked about Karen's pimp.
Yeah, so that's Paolo and Karen's subplot, and that's its own thing.
Well, we've neither the time nor the energy to go there, and we haven't really talked about the fake Daredevil either, which is, it's the idea of a fake Daredevil being used to frame Daredevil. It's a one and done in this. It was done quite well in the Netflix series where they had the fake Daredevil be Bullseye.
But Bullseye makes a lot more sense in that role than a random lunatic that you hired from an asylum.
There is a quite shocking moment and a slightly cathartic moment though where the guy does kill Wesley.
He does? Yeah, he goes mad.
He goes mad and kills Wesley because Wesley's being so condescending, and you go, oh, all right. Well, one horrible person has killed another there. Is that good?
Yeah, you'll remember, like, I said earlier, like, life is cheap in Frank Miller's Daredevil, and Wesley, who has been a stalwart character throughout Miller's entire run, is taken out by a random lunatic. He is literally, he literally gets his comeuppance having been the Kingpin's fixer for years, and he dies in such a quiet, awful way. He's murdered down a back alley and they don't find his body for days.
Just gets Billy clubbed to death. And then 2 cops are killed by Pedro, whatever his name is. 2 cops are shotgunned down by him because he turns out to be this almost preternatural gunslinger character. He's a weird character in this.
He's a weird character. I would argue that Karen as the instigating action here, where she sells his identity, her subplot back to Matt felt incredibly contrived to me, and she's just a horrible person for most of that subplot. She murders a blind man. Like, she bashes a Mexican blind man over the head with a pot and leaves him in stupor because she tried to steal from him.
Yeah, he's blind. Not great.
Because he's blind. And she obviously ends up in a horrible situation, whereupon she essentially gets Andrew Tated at the time by Pablo.
Allegedly.
Pablo promises, allegedly, Pablo promises to take her to New York. She does that. She does whatever it takes, which means that she has to pay him with sex, essentially, in order to complete this transaction. And then
still has her look.
he doesn't say goodbye. He wants to keep her. And she ends up, as I'm sure many people have in those situations, she ends up indebted to those people or in some form of slavery or abuse or manipulation that they never expected. They thought it would be a simple transaction, and it didn't turn out that way. But Pablo is bizarre. He is almost a supervillain in himself in how he, first of all, can track Karen down all the time.
Karen's not the most subtle, is she, to be fair?
No, she's not. She's a bit of a dope, is our Karen. But, you know, and then can take out cops and hired killers and, you know, survive gunshot wounds to the belly. And he's a bizarre character.
Yeah, very strange. Very strange. Benjamin, let's do some final thoughts, though. I thought it was great. Fucking miserable. Fucking miserable. The downfall is miserable. The rise again is very heroic and exciting and incredible. I feel it loses its way a little bit, becoming an Avengers comic by the end.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really resolve either.
No.
Like, it's very much... Like, the thing is, this isn't a limited series. This is...
No, it's part of
6
a broader
issues.
run.
Yeah, it's 6 issues from a broader run that have been highlighted out. And you could probably remake this as a very tight story, focused more on Daredevil and Karen and Foggy and Glory and Ben Urich and Kingpin. And there have been multiple attempts to do such, but I don't think any of them have added to this substantially.
Yeah.
While maintaining the core of it. The name, maybe, or the basic idea, bits of it have been snatched up and spread around, but this is still the best version of this story, to my mind.
Yeah, but it could have been a 5-issue masterwork.
It could have been a 6-issue masterwork. You could just redo it and not bring in the Avengers, or keep the Avengers for that one kind of mythic panel where they're presented as, you know, the superheroes. The still shining superheroes in the world where Matt's been broken down and come back up.
This would also be, I think I would be remiss if I didn't say, David Mazzucchelli pulls a bit of a masterstroke here. I think this is a beautiful to look at comic. I think it's stunningly done. Like there are several. I have a whole range of panels open here in front of Mick, ladies and gentlemen. But I think like J. Jonah Jameson gets an amazing moment of coloration here. You know, there's noir tones to it, but there's also some phenomenal sequential storytelling and horror elements to it. The Ben Urich is forced to listen to a man die over the phone sequence is stunning.
Yeah.
It's awful. The world of the Daily Bugle is happening around him while Lois is strangling a man to death on the other end of the phone. Ben Urich is forced to listen. One of my favorite things about that is it's actually a radicalizing act for Ben Urich, and he actually walks away from that going, actually, the Kingpin is too evil to be left unchecked. He was going to back off. He was living in fear, but he witnesses or hears this final and I thought that was a nice touch as well from Frank Miller. I think, you know, he doesn't actually get to see it. He gets to hear it very much in the same way that Daredevil gets to hear things, and I thought it was a nice way of playing with that concept.
Oh, yeah. Very good. Yeah, radar sense.
But yeah, almost, but in a horrific way. I think it was amazing. I think there's a few missed beats here and there. I don't understand Maggie is my mother as a thing. I thought that was a weird revelation. Matt Murdock's mum isn't dead. She's a nun who
always was
aware that he got superpowers.
Yeah.
In the
She's always been there.
hospital, and said it's going to be a gift, which I don't understand. But yeah, look, this is a very enjoyable comic, incredibly influential. David Mazzucchelli would go on to do Batman Year One in 1987 with Miller, and that would go on to be a seminal work. And that would be David Mazzucchelli's final bit of work on superhero comics, because he just didn't enjoy it. Didn't enjoy pen. Still does a comic. Still draws a comic, but that was his final superhero one. But look, massively influential comic, a very successful continuation of Miller's run on Daredevil. I'm really glad we read it, Michael. I had a good time.
Thoroughly enjoyed it, Benjamin. What's next month?
Folks, did you have a good time? Did you
fuck
enjoy
'em,
yourselves? Are you going to sit back after listening to this and have a cigarette? Why don't you? Why don't you click on the join the Discord link down below there and give us your opinions on next month's April's comic, ladies and gentlemen. April Fools, the 1st of April, japery, mischief, shenanigans.
April
What
Fish
could
Day.
be better, Michael? What
Yes.
could be better than reading 8 billion genies?
9 billion genies.
That's not what it is, Michael. Don't do that.
No, that would be better. That's what I'm saying.
Oh, 9 billion genies would be better. Yes, 8 billion genies. What would happen, ladies and gentlemen, if you got a single wish? What would you do with it? What would you do? Would you wish for more money? Would you wish to become a superhero? Would you wish for a mansion? Would you wish for the love of your life to love you back? What would you do, ladies
Start a
and
podcast.
gentlemen? Probably start a podcast with two cool Irish guys. But that's what we're taking a look at, ladies and gentlemen, and friends beyond the binary, in the 8-issue 8 Billion Genies from Charles Sewell and Ryan Brown by Image Comics. Every single human life on Earth gets their own dedicated genie that can grant one wish. And what
Isn't
happens
that the
as a
plot of
result
Wonder
of
Woman
that?
84?
Yes, Maxwell Lord, you don't know what you're doing. Give me the stone.
Take the emotion down a little bit, Ben. That was a little bit too good for
A
Gal.
little bit too much. Fill the Nile with champagne.
Oh, you've seen that? You've seen that TikTok, have you?
That's been rolling around in my brain. Ladies and gentlemen, very suitable that Michael should say that, because we are on TikTok, we are on Instagram, we are on Blue Sky, we are on Threads. We're not on X, because fuck Elon Musk. We're all over the place, ladies and gentlemen. We're all over the place. You can follow us at all of them at the link below. If you'd like to read some of our thoughts on comics, we're up there on a Substack as well.
What's that?
Yeah, Substack is a little blogging platform with links. It's good crack. Get on up there. You'll see a little retrospective on Frank Miller's work by the time you are listening to this episode. But hop up on there and read along with us as we go through 8 billion genies and watch the chaos unfold. Give us a review. Give us a listen. Work through some of the older episodes. I'm pointing behind me as if I have a shelf of old episodes. I don't.
Oh, I have them here, Ben.
You have them there in the Collecting Issues pull box.
They are. They're in the Collecting Issues pull box. There's Hellboy that we were talking about yesterday. But they're in here. They actually are in here, Ben. This isn't a conceit. They are actually in there. That's where we put them. They're really in there.
Keeps the issues.
Yeah, they're in there. It's
his-
great. It's great for the conceit, and like they're in there.
Yeah, it's functional and aesthetically pleasing. Great stuff all around.
And the box as well, Ben, not just me.
Not just you. Ding, ding, ding. Ladies and gentlemen, friends beyond the binary, thank you very, very much. Have a fantastic month. And we'll talk to you again very, very soon. Bye-bye.
Captain Finger Guns is an outro. I'm regretting it, but I'm going to stick with it.
Yeah, boom, boom, boom. Boom, boom, boom. Boom. This was a long one.